Welcome to Philanthropy Conversations, a new podcast series from Carleton University's Philanthropy and Nonprofit Leadership Program. I'm Megan Skivington in Toronto. On this podcast, we dive into the evolving world of Canadian philanthropy and nonprofit leadership. We talk about real challenges, opportunities, and strategies shaping the sector, both at home and abroad.
Bonjour everyone, welcome to the podcast. I am Daniel Lanting from Montreal here, and today we're diving deep with Lindsay, who's not only a nonprofit leader and philanthropist, but also a visionary in the field. Lindsay is the co-founder of two incredible organizations that really define our unique approach of giving. All right, Megan, are you ready?
Let's go. We are delighted to have our guest, Linsey Sherman-Zekulin, joining us today. Lindsay brings a wealth of experience that we're looking forward to exploring with her today and talking about a range of, aspects of the philanthropic world with her. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So Lindsay, can you share your journey into philanthropy and what key experiences or people have shaped your approach over the years?
Yeah, thank you so much, first of all, for having me on this podcast. I am a huge supporter of the program, and my journey really started at Carleton, actually, many moons ago. So it's really wonderful to be here with you both. After Carleton, I went to law school, actually, also in Ottawa, and that's sort of where the career part of my life started. I practiced for many years in family law in both Toronto and Ottawa. And although I wouldn't call that philanthropic work, there was a good chunk of my practice that I devoted to pro bono work and sort of working in the family systems and family justice system, where I could see the real need for pro bono and sort of the philanthropic side of the law. And I did that for many, many years and would have likely continued, but our family circumstances changed in around 2019. My husband had been on a bit of an entrepreneurial journey. And so in 2019, our life changed a little bit, and we realized that we, as part of that, wanted to make some kind of charitable contribution to our community, but we didn't know exactly what. We just knew we wanted to do something meaningful, make a difference, and have it be charitable. So what we decided to do was go the foundation route, because we thought that would let us create a structure and make the donation, and then give us a little bit of time to figure out where and who and how can we make an impact. So that's what we did. And in late 2019, early 2020, our foundation was born, and we called it Happy Roots Foundation. And so at that time, I really took a step away from practice and focused on Happy Roots. We knew that we needed someone to work in it. And I thought, well, wait a minute, that could be me. So along with that, I recruited my best friend from law school. I called her up one day. I'm like, I have an idea. I know you have a job already, but what do you think? And I pitched it to her. And so basically we started from the ground up. We did most of the work ourselves to structure and set up the foundation. We picked an issue area that we wanted, and then we kind of launched in. At around the same time, I started doing my master's in nonprofit management at Columbia. So it was a real building and flying the plane thing at the same time, because we'd be working at setting up Happy Roots, and then I would have class on Wednesday and Thursday nights. So I would call her the next day and be like, Monique, I've just learned this, and we need to structure things this way. Or, there's a lot of debate and criticism about this issue area, and should we consider doing it a different way? So we did that for a couple of years and sort of built the foundation at the same time that we were learning. And really that brings us to our journey. I mean, it's been 5 years that we sort of researched, learned, relationship built, made some grants along the way, of course, and really ultimately decided that we would spend it down by 2030. So that puts us halfway through our journey. at the foundation.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. And we're certainly going to get back on that 2030 a bit later on. So for our listeners, we might not, I'm sure everyone heard about the Happy Roots Foundation, but for those who have not yet, can you also share with us what actually it is, what inspired its creation? And I have to say, I was going to say the key areas, but I think you're really focusing on one specific area. So I would like to hear a bit more about that.
Mhm. Yeah, so we decided so early in our journey, right from the very beginning, we had chosen children's mental health as an issue area, sort of looping back to what I was saying about wanting to make a difference. My husband Mark and I knew at the beginning, okay, we want to pick an area. There's many different ways to do foundation work and philanthropic work, but for us, it felt important and sort of aligned with the way our brains work, I guess, to pick something specific and try and make a difference. So, children's mental health broadly meant a lot to us. I have a particular area of interest because that is what motivated me really to enter family law in particular. So, it's a bit of a through line for me personally. Um, and I laugh now because we thought when we were choosing children's mental health that we had narrowed the field to one issue area. And of course, yes, we did because there's any number of issues we could have chosen. But then within children's mental health, it is its own vast area. So, um, always learning. So early in our journey, I am grateful to a psychiatrist at the Children's Hospital in Ottawa, CHIO, who I became connected to through a friend. And she, although was very early in one of her maternity leaves, met me for coffee and chatted with me essentially about her work in psychiatry at a children's hospital. And I had said to her, you know, I know that everywhere in children's mental health will be underfunded. But is there, and I know it's maybe an unfair question, but is there an area in your work that you think is particularly underfunded or ripe for attention and acknowledgement and investment? And that was when she pointed out to me that infant and early childhood mental health was both super key in terms of helping kids and their families early on in life avoid sometimes changing the trajectory of their lives. And also an area that had not really caught the attention of many funders. It was a bit overlooked. We haven't, although the medical literature is pretty robust on it, we haven't generally in society spent too much time or focus on the idea that babies and really young children have developing mental health systems in the same way that we all do, and in the same way that their physical health is developing. So that was our initial foray into, okay, maybe this is the sub sector of children's mental health that we'll look at. And to get us started, she sent me like a list of things to read, videos to watch, medical journals, all the things. And Monique and I did a deep dive basically through most of 2020. Helped in part by the pandemic, because what better job was there to research and do things online than 2020? And so we really went down a rabbit hole and, of course, decided she was right. And that was a great tip. So from there, we drilled down our focus into grant making in that space specifically. We have done a couple of other small projects, but really, and I would say each year we've narrowed down further to try and lift up early stage projects that are focused specifically on infant and early childhood mental health, and launch them with the hope that some of those almost like act as a bridge. So some of those early stage projects that might be higher risk for longer term funders, that we might be able to help them essentially get legs, build their evidence base, and perhaps attract longer term funding.
Wow, that's an impressive way of doing philanthropy. let's say in today's landscape, like all this trust that you're putting in the project. And also when I'm thinking about Happy Roots, I'm thinking about what we call strategic giving. And I've heard that the term is quite used across the philanthropic sector. But I've also learned that looking at what you're doing, this is not just a buzzword for your organization saying that you're doing strategic giving. So I was wondering if you can walk us through maybe some specific example, just like the one you shared with us at a very early stage, and how this strategic approach is making it, let's say, tangible and a difference in the Ottawa community. And also, reflecting on what you said before, does it have anything to do with the reason you choose to put an end to your foundation in 2030? So I'm very curious hearing that.
I agree with you. It's so interesting because there are really, as you like dive into the study of philanthropy, words that are used a lot. And then when you go deeper, they can sometimes have different meanings or different interpretations. And I agree with you. I think strategic philanthropy is one of them. Um, to the extent that there's debate about what it means, is it donor led? Is it prescriptive? Um, what I would say our approach is we have taken what I hope to be like a consultative, trust based approach to making our grants in Ottawa. But I don't think that means that it's exclusive of strategic decisions. So at Happy Roots, we have a fund. It's a relatively finite amount up and down with the markets, but we have what we started with essentially. And we know we want to make a difference. So within that context, we have to make some choices. And I like to think that we have talked with as many people in the community that we can, come up with the idea, the mission, or the goal that we want more support in Ottawa and really across the province because we can't help ourselves keep dreaming bigger, but for parents to know and understand infant and early childhood mental health, not feel ashamed if they need to seek help and ask for help, and to have that help be available to them. So we've sort of picked that goal, not out of our own heads, but as I said, after chatting with lots of people in the community, meeting different organizations, doing research. And then in that context, now we're making some decisions that are strategic in terms of where we're able to make grants. So I would say one example of that is probably our biggest project is with the Children's Hospital. Um, and that we launched first as a 3-year project. That group had really off the sides of their desks. They are incredible people. Had built essentially like a pilot program to provide services to parents with kids aged 0 to 6, so newborn to age 6. And they were doing it off the sides of their desks because they really felt like they were seeing kids who were 10, 11, 12 years old in the ER suffering from mental health challenges. And they knew from the research and in their bones that if they had been able to see them earlier, they could help. So our sort of strategic decision was to come in at the end of that pilot project. It worked, but there's no money, and they don't yet have an evidence base because it was 1 year. Well, they had some evidence, but not a robust one. And say, okay, maybe we can be the group that takes on the risk. So let's build this out for 3 years. What does it look like over 3 years? And we do that all in conversation with them. They're the experts. They know what they're talking about. We are really the ones that, like, we have some funding knowledge, but not the deep understanding of the issues that they do. They know their work better than anyone. So we really worked together to roll that out. And then after 3 years, our primary goal, of course, is that they have long-term sustainable funding, shouting out to the government. And so we knew that was unlikely to happen after 3 years. So now we're in phase 2 and we're working with them on what does that look like as a second stage of the project, hopefully trying to get to that ultimate goal. So just circling back to the question of strategy, I mean, I think what we're trying to do when we make strategic is to build relationships and make strategic decisions within that context.
Great. I'd love to ask a follow-up, Lindsay, because again, I mean, it's only been 5 years for Happy Roots, but I'm sure it also feels like a lot longer, right? Like this is significant work that you've done in 5 years. What I'm curious about is, you talked about the early days of setting things up and doing your due diligence around establishing where you were giving. But what I'm wondering is, in the breadth of the last 5 years, has there been a moment where you were kept up at night or where you were worried about the decision making that you were putting in place around establishing Happy Roots and making these significant decisions? Or like, can you just share with us like a time when things might have been tough when it came to making those choices that again you were putting in place that are making a significant impact in community?
That's so interesting to think about. I truthfully, in my previous life, when I was working directly with families going through separation and divorce, that's when I had so many nights where I stayed up. So I suppose, in contrast, this work is really so joyful
Oh,
um, that I don't have quite that feeling of staying up at night. But Megan, as you were asking the question, I did think to myself, the one area, well, maybe two areas that I really reflect a lot on, um, and kind of check back in on, usually during daytime hours, but nonetheless, very thoughtfully and try and challenge myself on, are I feel really strongly that our traditional models of philanthropy and funder and or grant maker and grantee are are rooted in like a lot of institutional power imbalances. And
mhm.
I think a lot about whether I'm contributing to it, how can I not contribute to it? Even when I think I'm not contributing to it, am I contributing to it? So I have those types of like
Mm.
internal uh, conversations where I try to challenge myself. And in the context of our work, Monique and I, there's only two of us, but we certainly do that with each other back and forth. And similarly, when I was doing my master's program, I, you know, I didn't come from like the philanthropic world. So I had maybe a more naive understanding of giving and charitable giving. So I joined the program and I'm like, I'm a nice person. I've created a foundation. Yay. Uh, and then through the course of my program, and I'm sure you've both experienced it in your classes, there is a whole host of like thought leadership pushing back against foundations and some philanthropists and the way that we do things. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I hadn't known that prior to taking the program. I'm sure glad I'm taking this. And I worked to not take any of that personally because,
Mhm.
in lots of ways, philanthropy is also super personal. So, to kind of take myself out of that equation personally and look really critically at the role of foundations. Uh, and I mean, it's tied to that power imbalance piece, but how we work and um, the respect we have for nonprofit leaders and their expertise and the role that they have. So over 2 years doing that program, it was like I really had to take myself out of it and appreciate and accept those criticisms and then think really carefully about them and how we could apply them at Happy Roots. That's not always easy to do because you are a human being. So um, I would say it's not stress in like the more traditional type of stress, but I would say that is one of the constant internal conversations that I'm
Yeah.
having and that we try to have as much as we can.
Yeah. It sounds more, again, like you say, not traditional stress, but more just real critical reflection that obviously comes with going to school and learning more about how this industry is framed, um, which is perhaps healthy, when you're doing the type of work you're doing, because you're doing it in a very conscious way. Before we move on to another question, though, I would like to just make sure that I focus on maybe the other side of my question, which is to not lose sight of, you mentioned joy, and you mentioned actually, this work feeling a particular way. So obviously there's the critical analysis that you talk about, doing this work in a way that is very mindful and trying not to do more harm, knowing that the system is imperfect. But I wonder if we could just hear a little bit more from you. Maybe you could share either an instance that you're really proud of, a moment within Happy Roots with your team, or where you see that impact come to life. Could you explain to us a little bit more about what that joy looks like in terms of the impact of Happy Roots in community?
One of my very favorite parts is when we get to meet the people that work in the programs that we've funded, and occasionally we get to meet some of the people that they themselves help through the programming, and that is really the most beautiful part. When we launched our first really round of it's now called the Early Connections program at the
Mhm.
Children's Hospital. Uh, but there was an announcement that day. And so we went. I'd never been to an announcement before. It was all very nervous, but there were a few different people there. And one of them was the parent of a child who had been helped by the doctors and the staff in that program at GEO. And to hear her share her story so bravely and to know that we'd had a part in helping them be able to provide that service was really moving. It was one of the most moving experiences that I've ever had.
Mm.
Um, and really, that has, as I said before, on the children's mental health piece being a through line through my work, really that's where I get my most joy, um, is when you can see that you've taken something, in our case, it's funding, put it in the hands of people who are experts at what they do,
Mhm.
know what needs to be done, and just don't have it because of the struggle and the fight for funding, and then are able to translate that into like actually helping people. And the thing about helping parents with really young kids is that you've now helped them for like a lifetime.
Yeah.
And that there's helping people is wonderful at any stage of their life, but at the very beginning, to know that you very likely helped them on a different trajectory is really moving.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So we're now going to go into a slightly different direction to explore a little bit more of your experience and perspective. So I want to talk a little bit about women in philanthropy. Obviously, you talk about your executive director as a woman as well, and you have your own experience. So I'm just wondering if we could reflect on the breadth of your experience and knowing your commitment to gender equity. I'm wondering what are some of the challenges you see for women in the philanthropic landscape today, and how might these challenges be addressed to foster greater equity?
Say that what I find really interesting about the philanthropic space is that it is so positive in the sense that charitable donations and charitable giving comes from largely a very beautiful place. Um, and so, because of that, it can be hard to think about the structures that underpin it and whether things could be done differently, whether some of those structures are traditional, perhaps patriarchal, and not that, and that could be changed in a way that would contribute to greater equality and greater equity for everybody to participate in. Um, so, bec- and what I mean by that is because it's hard to challenge an industry that has as its root something so positive, or it can be a little more challenging because it is such a beautiful thing. So, I think for women in philanthropy in particular, um, one of the things that Monique and I talk a lot about and that we've tried to take on is that question of, can we do things differently? Can we embrace some principles? Um, we think they're feminist principles, but inclusive of everyone, that might change some of those underlying structures. And what can we do in our little part of the world? So there are lots of different avenues that we could talk about women in philanthropy, but for us, that's where we've focused a fair bit of our work, largely in terms of like, what does our grant making process look like? And does it need to be the more traditional way of grantor grantee, very rigid power structure between those two, power dynamic between those two entities? What do reporting requirements have to look like? All of that piece. So I could talk a little bit more about that, but that's where we've largely focused our work in trying to do things a little bit differently.
Now, a word from our sponsor. We're also excited to work with IG Wealth Management, a leader in helping Canadians achieve their financial goals. They are generously supporting the podcast, and we're excited to have them on board and look forward to welcoming their expert, Christine Van Cowenberg, in future episodes. IG has a long history of working and supporting community and helping their clients with philanthropy through their strategic charitable giving program. To learn more, visit www.igprivatewealth.com. Now, back to the show.
Yes, I'd like to hear more about that actually. And I really like the example you gave at the announcement. It to me was just such a nice way to explain what is trust-based philanthropy. You were saying the doctors know what they have to do. We're funding that. And it's not just giving money, closing your eyes, and do what you have to do with money. That is not the definition of trust-based philanthropy. But going there, I'm very curious about what's your own definition. How do you live that? And what kind of let's say the matrix that you're using to say, oh, this is something we can support. This is a way we could support also, just to see what's kind of the dynamic, just also in the way of shifting powers, being aligned and having conversation with the organization you're supporting.
We have really sort of embraced the idea of trust-based philanthropy being underpinned by collaboration and relationship building. And we start everything in an early conversation, and all based on getting to know each other. And by that, I mean the organization that we might be interested in working with or that we've identified has an early stage project. And we really connect with them. And it is very informal, very informal. But that is intentional because we are mindful, and I think this is one of the pieces of a trust-based philanthropic approach, is that we are respectful of the work and the expertise and the role that the leaders in the organization are doing and that they have. So we don't want to spend a lot of time on a fancy presentation or a super rolled out grant proposal when it's not going to be a good use of their time. So we really start at the beginning with a conversation. We do a lot of homework so that they don't have to teach us about what they're doing. We come in knowing as much as we can. And if we need to know more, we ask for direction, and then we go down a rabbit hole. A couple of law school nerds love nothing more than going down a rabbit hole of research and trying to better understand an organization. Again, being super respectful of their time. We try to be as transparent as we can about what our decision-making process is. And sometimes there's a good and a bad side to flexibility. It's very flexible. That sometimes means we can't say exactly what it is because we ourselves are working through it alongside them. But every one of our grants really has come about through, first of all, conversation. Second, a super informal bullet point. What could this look like? If you were building a project, what is it that you need? We can't promise from the beginning that we can fund everything, but could you help us understand what's your best case scenario? What would it really look like? And that's hard. That's also really hard for organizations who are not, because it's so far outside the regular grant process, to be asked that question. And it can be a challenge too to ask, like build it out. And we ask because we simply don't know. Again, they know their work better than anyone. And then we do a series typically of conversations, and sometimes we'll work through a proposal, and we have in the past said, like, this looks like a lot of work in a short period of time and not that many people. Do you need to build in administrative assistance here? Is there enough time off? Is there enough, support, capacity building here in order to make this really successful? And because we are in relationship, we trust them to come back. And when we asked that question in one particular case, I knew that if the answer was no, this is it, this is good, that they would tell us. And I also felt that if it wasn't and they needed to add a line item to the overall grant proposal, that they would do that. And so I think, kind of circling all the way back to the trust-based piece, that for us it's rooted in relationship. The more we get to know each other, the more we get to know each other's work, the more that our partners trust us, that we are honest about what we're doing, transparent with as much information as we can give them, and that we really do respect what we're doing, the better it gets. And on the kind of back end, in the same way that we don't ask for like a super Canva budget or proposal right at the beginning, we also feel the same about reporting requirements. And I don't even like to call it reporting requirements because it sounds too formal. And reflective of maybe other practices. Like, I don't know how many people in the nonprofit space I've talked to who spend hours working on reports that they know nobody is going to read, or that sit on a shelf, and that aren't really reflective of their work, or they're counting up numbers that aren't reflective of the actual value of their program or their service that they're offering. And we don't want to contribute to that. So when we talk about reporting, it's really, we build it into the process. So we have more regular meetings. And by the way, I don't mean to suggest that we don't care. Like, we do care. We are interested in how it's going, but we actually can get more out of a 30-minute conversation with the partners that we're working with than out of a super long report that's checking, various boxes. So we have those throughout our process. And that also gives us the opportunity, and this is where we have to build trust with our partners, to say, like, what's working and what's not working. And there may be things through the course of a project that aren't working. And so then we can actually work together on some creative solutions. So in one project, the group wasn't able to see as many people as they had wanted to see, and it was because of this intervening effect related to the pandemic. And because we had more frequent meetings, we were able to restructure the funding so that some funding went somewhere else. That frees up time for this person who had otherwise been pulled away to look back and focus back on the project. So we're really, truly, and truthfully open to hearing, like, it's not working, or we thought it would be this, but it's not that. Can we do things a little bit differently? And that does take trust. And it's in part because I think some elements of grant making in the sector haven't been like that previously, but it's more, and there are more people working that way. But, and the whole trust-based philanthropy movement, I think, is going that direction. But those are sort of, to your question about what it looks like day to day, those are kind of the elements of our grant making process that we try and infuse into our relationships. And as a result, we have great relationships with the people we work with. When we go to conferences, we go out for dinner. Like, it's really a very collaborative.
So that's great. So I think what we're really hearing from you, Lindsay, is a reflection on sort of the process around trust-based philanthropy and, the richness that's there, obviously, in your own practice. What I'm curious about, though, is actually to focus on the mindset that's required to do this type of work, which is very entrepreneurial and innovative. And again, I think in our philanthropic spaces, we could definitely use a healthy dose of that. And so it's really exciting to hear about this framing from you. What I'm curious about is, based on your experience and what you're seeing in the philanthropic landscape, what strategies are you potentially seeing that really lean into that entrepreneurial way of thinking and doing and participating in a relationship with those that you're working with to fund those projects? And maybe another way to think about this is, understanding that there's a 2030 timeline for Happy Roots. What would you like to see by 2030 or in the future of trust-based philanthropy that really leans into entrepreneurial ways of doing things and innovative ways of doing things differently?
I love the way that you framed that, Megan, because I do think there is something really entrepreneurial about it. And I never considered myself particularly entrepreneurial, although in the last couple of years I've sort of dipped my toe into entrepreneurial life and learned a lot about it. And there are some really exciting uh, things that come about when you kind of embrace that mindset, as you put it. Um, like as we've talked about, Happy Roots is 5 years into our 10-year journey, and we didn't come with experience in philanthropy really, not at this level prior to that. So everything that we've talked about today on trust-based philanthropy are things we've learned and things we've learned from others who are working in the space, and there are so many. Um, I would say a few things that we've learned from others that we're seeing others doing. Every conference that we've been a part of in the last several years, both philanthropy and nonprofit leaders, but also just among philanthropists, is a very ongoing discussion about um, collaborations among philanthropic partners, the need for more of them, the opportunity, what it could look like if more philanthropists and foundations get together and pool their resources towards some common goals. Um, it has happened a little bit in the past. It's happening a lot more now. And I think there's a real opportunity for that to grow. There was a very big announcement recently on philanthropists coming together around climate change. Happy Roots is working on a proposal with other philanthropic partners to work with the government on funding some research. So the area is ripe for opportunity in terms of collaborations. And, to tie it back to the trust-based piece, I mean, there's lots of ways that can work, but fundamentally successful collaborations happen when they're based on positive, respectful, transparent working relationships. So although they're not uh, necessarily tied to each other, I do believe that in all of those collaborative elements, there must be an element of trust for it to be successful. So I think that that's exciting and new and could really make an impact. It's an opportunity for the philanthropic sector to make an even bigger impact than it's already making. The other thing we often talk about, kind of back to the entrepreneurial piece, that I think is super exciting is the opportunity for philanthropy to step in really high risk situations. So, and by high risk, I mean to support projects and people and organizations and movements that are in their early stage. So it's like an entrepreneurial approach essentially to philanthropy because it can be harder to access government or government adjacent type grants when you don't yet have an evidence base, even though you know it could work. Or maybe the research isn't quite there, but there's a really good reason to believe that it is. And maybe partnering with a government agency on that, kind of back to the collaborative piece, but to really come in early and take on some of the risk that other funders don't have the mandate to do. And that is super exciting. We've tried to do it as best we can on a small scale, but I know there's other foundations across the country that are also looking at doing that in their own issue areas that they care about. On the spend down piece, this is really tied, we believe it's tied closely to like all of the sort of principled pieces that we've talked about so far. Um, but I think it's also kind of an innovative thing that is happening in the philanthropic sector. It's becoming a little more common. Um, it is definitely increasing in profile, I would say, in the United States. And then Canada is kind of also coming on board with some of those ideas. We've attended a lot of webinars and learning sessions on spend down that are all out of the US, but frequently some of our Canadian friends and partners pop up there and then we connect with each other. So I think the list of private foundations that are looking at spending down as an end date is growing. And I think it's really important as sort of a piece of, I mean, it's not directly tied to trust based philanthropy per se, but I think the idea of the philanthropic sector using the resources that it has today to contribute to solving the problems that we have today is um, I'm trying to think of the right word, but is complementary to some of those principles that are, around collaboration, trust, respect, and relationships, because our partners in the nonprofit sector are working on today's problems, and there are a lot of resources in the philanthropic sector that we could channel, uh, perhaps more so, to the problems that they're working on today and that we're all struggling with today. So, um, and when I say today, I don't mean actually today. Like, of course, there is a huge benefit to philanthropists and private foundations in particular, having being able to take a longer term view. There are strategic elements to being able to do that. You don't have the same pressures that government funding has. So, private foundations can really help, actually, I think, by taking a longer view, particularly if they're focused on an issue area. But does it need to be in perpetuity? Do the funds need to grow and grow and grow in perpetuity? Or could we channel them in some kind of sunsetted way that is appropriate for perhaps the size of each foundation, that would really complement some of the changes that we've talked about, or a refresh. I liked it when you said that, a refresh in the philanthropic sector, some new ideas. And I think that is one that could make really a monumental difference,
Yeah.
uh, both in the sector and the way it sees itself, and also the impact that private foundations are able to have, and support for all of the charitable organizations and nonprofits that are doing that like really crucial work. Because if not now or in the next couple of decades, like when?
When? Yeah. Well said. Well said.
That is fascinating. I could talk about this for hours.
Me too.
Um,
If I
yeah.
do a PhD, it's going to be on this topic.
Oh,
Oh,
Lindsay, I'm with
certainly.
you. Let's go.
Well, doing that. And so you've learned a lot. I mean, during your whole life, but especially during the last 5 years, creating this foundation and learning about the philanthropic sector and on its own. And I was wondering if you could talk to your younger self before doing all of this. What kind of advice would you give to yourself about the philanthropic sector, about how to do philanthropy, about power dynamics, everything we covered today? What advice would you give to your younger self?
My younger self was maybe preoccupied with doing things exactly the right way, not making mistakes, um, picking a career path, sticking close to the identity. And I did not envision, I would never have envisioned as a younger person moving into a career shift sort of mid career. Um, and it was not easy for me to do it at the time. It's been a wonderful journey, but I was attached to having spent a good chunk of time learning about one particular area, uh, being a lawyer, and having to challenge myself on that and the idea of starting something and learning everything new, and in all likelihood making mistakes, was hard. And I would tell my younger self that that's going to happen and it's going to be okay. And you don't have to pick one thing and then become really good at it and never make a mistake again. That you can change things, you can learn a lot of things midlife and beyond. And that if you are genuine and honest and curious in your learning, that even when you make mistakes, it can usually be resolved. And I think that entering like the philanthropic journey with curiosity and some humility and being able to take like an academic or intellectual look at it outside of the personal has been really useful in this journey, but also like blowing my mind because I wouldn't have predicted it at the beginning, but I feel really grateful that those circumstances arose and sent me on a new journey. Yes.
Mhm. All right. Well, we have enjoyed this conversation so much, Lindsay. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights. Again, there's so much that we could dive into further, but we only have so much time today. But before we let you go, I have one last question. If you could ask one question of our next guest, a Philanthrothink, that would help us deepen our understanding of the sector, of trust-based philanthropy, you name it, what would that question be?
It's true. I feel like we could probably talk all day, but here is my question. Shout out to your next guest. If you could have a redo in your philanthropic work, what would it be? Why? And what did you learn?
I love that. So we're going to make them do a little healthy reflection. It's never a bad thing. Again, Lindsay, thank you so much. And thank you as well for the work that you do, making positive, impacts in your community and beyond. We're really excited to continue to watch Happy Roots do its good work, and we're cheering you on. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.